I'm Kevin Laramée. Welcome to Sports World today. This is March 26, 2020. Here's your sports news for today. Let's start with Major League Baseball. Today was supposed to be opening day in Major League Baseball, but unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 virus, the situation is postponed. We'll know more later. But Major League Baseball and Commissioner Rob Manfred are now considering a shortened season but expanded playoffs for the 2020 season. This is an interesting possibility, having a shorter season. Of course, it would have started now. There's no need for 162 games. There could be less than that. And then you have an expanded playoff, which means more team in the playoffs. Maybe that's a possibility. But Major League Baseball and Commissioner Rob Manfred, as of March 26, 2020, are looking into the possibility of having a shorter season for the regular season, but maybe longer playoffs for Major League Baseball and for every team in the 2020 regular season. Now let's move to motorsports. Let's talk about the Indianapolis 500 has been pushed back. It has been postponed. One of the biggest races in the world and part of the Triple Crown, the ultimate dream of every real driver out there. Only really achieved by Graham Hill, Damon Hill's father. Fernando Alonso is famously going for it now. Jacques Villeneuve did try to go for it in the late 90s, early 2000. But the crown jewel of the IndyCar series and one of the biggest one-day races of the world, the Indianapolis 500 has been pushed back to August 23rd, originally taking place on May 24th. And the Indianapolis 500 is one of the biggest races in the world. And here's an article that you can find on tsn.ca. The months of May at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is my favorite time of year, and like our fans, I am disappointed that we have had to reschedule the Indianapolis 500, said motorsports giant Roger Penske, who finalized his purchase of IndyCar and IMS, Indianapolis Motor Speedway, earlier this year. However, the health and safety of our event participants and spectators is our top priority, and we believe that postponing the event is a responsible decision with the conditions and restrictions we are facing, he said Thursday. We'll continue to focus on ways we can enhance the customer experience in the months ahead, and I'm confident we will welcome fans with a transformed facility and a global spectacle when we run the world's greatest race. The Indy 500 began in 1911, but did not run in 1917 and 1918, and from 1941 to 1945 because of World Wars I and II. Tony Holman bought the neglected speedway after the Second War, and the Indy 500 returned on Memorial Day weekend in 1946, and has been scheduled for that weekend every year since. Although weather disrupted other runnings of the prestigious race, it had never been outright rescheduled until now. Now, the world's greatest race will take place on August 23rd. Also, the Indy GP and the Brickyard 400. The Indy GP is what you would call the road race of the IndyCar series at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The Brickyard 400 is a NASCAR race on the circuit, on the oval. It's going to be a back-to-back doubleheader situation in the same weekend, which has never been done with IndyCar and NASCAR. This in an effort to condense the IndyCar schedule. Now let's continue our talk and let's go to France. Let's talk about the Tour de France, the greatest cycling race in the world. One of my favorite events of the entire sports calendar, and unfortunately, like other events, it has been affected, and we'll see how much soon. But ASO, Amaury Sports Organization, the owner of the Tour de France, the organizers of the Tour de France, are looking at the possibility of holding the event closed door. Now, the question is, it's not an easy thing to do, to have a closed door event of the Tour de France. It's an event that's happening in the public, outside, on the streets. You cannot organize gathering of people is one thing, but stopping and forbidding fans to watch the race is another. And the force necessary to make sure that you enforce the rules and law is another one. To enforce it is another one. To have the law in place, like forbid people to take a seat on the side of the road to watch the Tour de France go by, is one thing. To have gendarmes and to have policemen to stop them on a regular basis is another. And it's going to be a difficult time for the Tour de France. We'll know more. There's been tons of cyclists that have actually been diagnosed with COVID-19. So that is another aspect of it. By the way, if you're a cycling fan, cyclingnews.com, one of your best source for cycling news in the world of cycling news. Speaking of cycling news, this is an article that you can find on La Presse here in Canada in French. Mike Woods for Education First, powered by Drapac, the team of Jonathan Vaughters, of course, the American team. Mike was the Canadian cyclist who had the Olympics as a target for 2020, but unfortunately during Paris-Nice, he fell. And he does blame a little bit, not COVID-19, the situation per se, but being distracted. A lot of cyclists left the races, and some great cyclists left Paris-Nice to not be stuck in Europe if borders or airports were actually going to close because of COVID-19 in the last couple of weeks. Mike Woods actually was part of that race in Paris-Nice, and he was a bit distracted, fell, and he broke a leg. And with his tibia broken, he knew he was going to miss the Olympic Games, which was one, if not the target for him in 2020, being a circuit type of terrain that actually suits his capabilities, type pretty mountainous. And Mike Woods is a good climber, pungy sprint type of climber, not a 20 kilometer long, but it's 5 kilometer long, pretty harsh. He can get there and sprint on top of that climb. That's a type of cyclist that Mike Wood is. So for Mike Woods, he was talking about how life is beautiful now because unfortunately he's with his wife and his children in Europe at home, rehabilitating, not really moving, not doing anything. But the world has stopped also. So there is no Olympics. So we will be getting a chance to represent Canada next year at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics happening in 2021. Now with the postponement of the Summer Olympics. And we will talk more about the Summer Olympics in the second half of the show later. There's a lot of news and there's a task force, and we'll get to it in a couple of minutes. Now let's talk about UFC. The Ultimate Fighting Championship. Another bad news for the UFC. This time it has nothing to do with UFC 249 or the Tony Ferguson-Khabib Nurmagomedov fight. This one is Jon Jones once again. Yes, the light heavyweight champion of the UFC has been arrested once again earlier today in Albuquerque, New Mexico, his hometown. That's where he trains also with Greg Jackson MMA. Jon Jones is his third arrest for DUI-related charges, also with negligent possession of a firearm. He had a revolver under his seat that was loaded and allegedly was loaded and not handled properly, according to New Mexico and Albuquerque bylaws. One of his charges is that, and the other one is, of course, driving wildly intoxicated. Unfortunately, driving wildly intoxicated, but he was an aggravated DWI. He was very intoxicated. He is very well known by the Albuquerque Police Department. He has done hit and runs and DUIs before in the same county. If he wasn't Jon Jones and the heavyweight champion, he would have been in jail for a long time. He has been stripped by the UFC 3 times already for similar behavior. We'll see where the UFC, if the UFC takes stands here. But another bad news for the Ultimate Fighting Championship. We'll have more on that story when Dana White, president of UFC, addresses that issue and the upcoming UFC 249 in the upcoming few days. Now let's talk about tennis. Let's move to the All England Cup in England, of course, in Wimbledon, just outside of London. We're talking about the British Tennis Association and the All England Club having an emergency board meeting next week to figure out the situation of Wimbledon. Now that the postponement of the Olympics is official. It does open up some space in the calendar to maybe postpone Wimbledon at least. The rest of the grass season is in jeopardy as of right now. Even Wimbledon as a whole is in jeopardy. Cancellation is not out of the realm of possibility. Postponement is also possible. Now, according to the chairman of the All England Club and the British Tennis Association, both persons mentioned that a period of 2 months are necessary for the preparation of the All England Club to host the Wimbledon. The actual grass courts takes 2 months for preparation, to the point where workers are able to go back to work at the All England Club. And as of right now, things are shut down until mid-April in the UK. We're looking at 2 months from mid-April. We're looking at a mid-June minimum possibility for the All England Club in Wimbledon. Now, the thing is, Roland Garros has also been postponed in France. Usually, it's Roland Garros first, as a second major of the year, Wimbledon third, and the US Open later in the fall. Now, things will be different this year, having the Australian Open also having been postponed. A lot are to be changed in the tennis calendar this year, and we'll know more. But as of right now, the All England Club is thinking of postponing Wimbledon. It has the opportunity to find maybe a window in late summer, later at least than mid-June. It is a possibility, but 2 months are necessary for the preparation of course, the All England Club and all the courts adjacent. Now let's move to the National Hockey League. Donald Fear, Executive Director of the National Hockey League Players Association, mentions that a full 2020-2021 season is very important, and he does agree with Bill Daly, Deputy Commissioner of the National Hockey League, that a 2020-2021 full season is important, and they're both adamant about the situation. But also, they both agree that the season can be delayed and pushed back a bit to give space for the completion of the 2019-2020 regular season, currently postponed due to the COVID-19 situation. So, there is space also there for the NHL to find a way to wrap up the regular season, have a playoff in the summer, then have a little shortened off-season hiatus and come back in the fall a little bit later than normal, maybe with the 2020-2021 regular season of the National Hockey League, which could be a good idea. But what do you do if you're the National Hockey League? When do you consider to pull the plug on 2019-2020? Do you just held playoffs? When do you consider that possibility? Will the Stanley Cup be awarded? Will it become like other sports? A few sports have the same calendar in the world of sports right now and are in a very similar situation. We're looking at the Premier League in England. We're looking at the National Basketball Association, NBA, and the NHL, of course. The three big leagues here are in a similar situation where they are late in their calendar, late in the regular season, but not quite in the playoffs yet. Not quite there. Enough time to change, and enough games remaining to play. Enough time left. Maybe not to change Liverpool as winner of the Premier League, but to change 3, 4, 5th in the table. To change the playoff spot in the NHL and in the NBA. With the resurgence of the Lakers and all in the NBA before it's shut down, you can see how there's still enough to play that would dictate the landscape of the playoffs in all these two leagues, and maybe the Champions League team in the Premier League. But when does it come too late? When is it time to react? What do you think? That's our question of the day here on Sports World today. What do you do with the 2019-2020 calendar of leagues that are right now up in the air, like the Premier League, like the NHL, and like the NBA? How do you handle the coming back of these leagues? The presence of a training camp, if so. Or even you just find a way to have a playoff and just determine who wins or who finishes last for the lottery also, which is another big aspect of both the NBA and the NHL. And that's the question here. What is there to do for these three leagues? And that's our question of the day. Thank you for answering the question on our Twitter feed. You can follow my personal Twitter at Kev Laramée, or you can also email us sportspodcastingnetwork@gmail.com. Now, talking about the Olympics. Of course, we announced yesterday, and it was announced by the International Olympic Committee and the Tokyo Organizing Committee, that the 2020 Tokyo Summer Olympics will be postponed. And earlier on Thursday, Australia, as a country, asked that the ages of the soccer tournaments be modified to allow players that were part of the team for this year be included in next year. Basically, if you don't know, the men's soccer tournament is an under-23 tournament with 3 overage spot allotted. For next year, it will be changed to an under-24 tournament. It is official at this point, with the 3 overage player not changing. Also, every athlete that qualified for 2020 will be competing for 2021. They will have their spot. That is also official. IOC has announced that fact earlier today. So an example, gymnasts, or 57% of the athletes that actually did qualify already for these games will be qualified for these games. They will not have a redo of the entire qualification process. Only the spots that were still left up to determination, still up to competition, will be taking place. And now there's more time for these taking place later on this summer to get ready for the Olympic next summer. And also, it is believed that the rules will not be changed, and that is why it's called Tokyo 2020, and it will not change if you are of a certain age, too young still to participate to the original dates of the Olympic. Example, you're a gymnast, you would have been 15, you're not allowed to participate in the full Olympics yet. Well, that doesn't change for next year. You still go through the same cycle that you would have had to gone through if you were, of course, a young gymnast athlete from 16 to 15. I think it's the best example for that. Still talking about the Olympics here and the task force. There is a task force, and they actually met earlier today. Here's an article that you can find from multiple sources. This one is on globalnews.ca, but it's from the Associated Press, from Stephen Wade earlier this morning. The Tokyo Olympics need new dates for the opening and closing ceremonies in 2021. Nothing much can get done until those dates are worked out by the International Olympic Committee, the Japanese government, and Tokyo organizers. We must decide this soon, otherwise it will be hard to decide on other things to follow, Toshiro Muto, the CEO of the organizing committee, told his 30 senior directors, all men but one, seated in a large meeting room on Thursday. 2 days after the unprecedented postponement was announced, the group gathered for the first meeting of what is being called the Tokyo 2020 New Launch Task Force. They must put the Olympics back together after they were torn apart by the coronavirus pandemic. Muto and the president of the organizing committee, Yoshiro Mori, each gave pep speeches. Mori, an 82-year-old former Japanese prime minister, drew on war memories from his youth to summon the resolve to redo in a few months what was 7 years in the planning. He talked of his father going to the war in the Pacific and leaving a rugby ball and baseball glove behind for his young son. I'm sorry, I'm an old person, and I talk about the old days, Mori said. I'm comparing this to the old days, and I might be criticized by the media. However, this is the emotion I have inside me, and this is the emotion I have as we face the predicament in front of us. Muto ran off a condensed string of issues to be resolved: ticketing, security, venues, merchandise, accommodation, the athletes' village, transportation, and lining up unpaid volunteers. He added he was looking at thousands of contracts and the interest of broadcasters, sponsors, the IOC, World Sports Federations, and National Olympic Committees. I didn't imagine at all we'd be tested to this degree, he acknowledged. He also voiced another reality. Additional expenses are going to be quite massive, we assume, Muto said. The Japanese financial newspaper Nikkei has estimated added costs due to the delay of $2.7 billion. This would go on top of an official budget of $12.6 billion. A Japanese national audit agency, however, says the actual amount of spending is about twice that size. IOC President Thomas Bach said Wednesday that all options are on the table for new dates. He said next year's Olympics don't have to be restricted to summer in the Northern Hemisphere. It might occur sooner. Two of the marquee Olympic events, track and swimming, have already scheduled their own World Championship for July and August of 2021, and both also have been opened in the possibility of moving their respective World Championship to accommodate the Olympic Games of 2020. More to follow, of course, when the task force actually comes out with the dates. I expect a 2 to 4 week period, probably closer to 4, until we may have the official dates of the 2020 Games happening in 2021. Before we wrap up, let's talk about the Canadian Football League a little bit. The Global Draft is rescheduled for the Canadian Football League. CFL Global Draft rescheduled as led an event prior to training camp. The CFL has rescheduled the 2020 edition of the Global Draft to coincide with the opening of training camps due to the ongoing public health concern regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. In the days prior to the league's 9 members club welcoming back its players in anticipation of the upcoming season, the top global prospects will be invited to Toronto to showcase their skills for CFL coaches, general managers, and league personnel at a global combine. Following the event, teams will participate in the CFL Global Draft, where the top international athletes will vie for the honor of being selected first overall by the Ottawa Redblacks. So we'll know more. It will be rescheduled at the beginning and at the training camp event for the CFL during their relaunch, because they are postponed also, and their training camp is delayed until further notice. We're going to finish the show today talking about the National Football League, but more especially about Drew Brees. Good news in dark times coming out of Louisiana. Drew Brees, legend of the New Orleans Saints now, for sure. The Super Bowl winning quarterback has pledged $5 million to the state of Louisiana to help deal with COVID-19. And I think that's a very worthwhile situation. Earlier when we're talking about UFC, there's also positive news when it comes to UFC, this time for Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor donating $1 million to Irish hospitals for dealing with COVID-19. Same by here, Drew Brees donating $5 million to the state of Louisiana to help them deal with the COVID-19 situation. That's a very generous pledge, a very generous gift by Drew Brees to the state that has been nice to him. And it's a good way to help hospitals and to help workers and help everyone through this tough time. Same for Conor McGregor. Hope you enjoyed the show today. We are listener supported, and you can support us with your pledges at patreon.com/sportspodcastingnetwork. Your support goes a long way. Your support helps independent journalism in the sports world. And there's never enough independent journalism in the sports world. You can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Laramée. You can contact us on social media also at sportspodnet, by email sportspodcastingnetwork@gmail.com. And we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of Sports World Today. Until then, wash your hands, stay safe, and have a great sport.